So this week we've got Lucky joining us. Do you want to introduce yourself, Lucky?
Yeah, so I'm Jonathan Lucky. Yep, Lucky's my real last name. Doesn't do me much good in Vegas. Currently, I'm a Scrum Master, or actually, I should use my official title, an Agile Lead at the Zone. So I manage several of the Scrum Masters there and work across a lot of delivery, across a lot of different teams in the Zone. Before that, I'm obviously American. I used to work for the Zone in the US 3 years ago, transferred here. They asked me to come here and make them all suffer my horrible, loud voice. But before that, used to work at an organization called CSS, Pristine Software. We did business intelligence reporting. And back in those days, I was a product manager. And even before that, I was doing marketing. And before that, I was doing sales. So I kind of came into the Agile world from a little bit of a different angle, from a product side of things and a business side of things. And yeah, and that was me. So I've become quite passionate about it, about Agile, mainly because seeing what teams and what organizations can potentially be if you embrace the right principles, cultures, practices, etc. So yeah, I like long walks to the beach.
It's particularly pertinent into the topic we've got this week. So this week's topic, correct me if I'm wrong, Erica, is Scrum Masters. Do we need them once the team is mature? Is that about the same?
Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, yeah.
And Agile coaches. So I guess slightly inflammatory. Anyone want to kick us off?
But you don't want to do yourself out of a job here, Lucky.
Hey, I may not have one by the end of this podcast.
Shall I go in with something slightly controversial to start us off then?
Go for it.
So teams clearly need some form of help, especially if they're not new to Agile at the start. So Scrum Masters are invaluable. And a dedicated Scrum Master is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But once a team have achieved a degree of maturity, are they needed anymore? So I guess we've seen lots of times where teams actually, now a Scrum Master can back off, or they can be across a couple, or maybe they can just go entirely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are some bad behaviors that start to sneak in. We can chat about that, but I guess I would argue that they're indispensable at the start,
mm-hmm.
and probably towards the end not so needed anymore. Maybe they can move to other teams and help them. Anyone want to pitch in on that?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Abbas.
I mean, I massively disagree with that. Yeah, absolutely indispensable at the start. I'm going to say indispensable all the way through. Indispensable for a mature team. Like how can a team do all of the facilitation, do all of the improvement process, do all of the things that affect them that they're not in control of, right? So in terms of how do they interact with other teams, how do they interact with the business, how do they interact with other areas of the projects and product development that they're working on, any interaction that they do outside of that team is going to take away from what their kind of their meat and potatoes is, which is building product. So anything that they do outside of that is going to take away. And I think removing that person, that Scrum Master, Agile coach, whatever we're calling them, is going to take away from productivity that team can do. That's aside from the fact that they're probably not the right skills in the developers, testers, etc., to be able to do that facilitation stuff. Even if they were mature, there's a skill level that the Scrum Master brings that I don't think they have.
And I guess also it's being able to observe from almost outside a little bit as a Scrum Master. You're not actually one of the people doing the work. You're actually observing from outside, so you can help the team improve. That is
exactly. You end up with a team lead doing it all, and then we all kowtow to the team lead. Sorry, Lucky, go for it.
No, you guys are absolutely right. I mean, I think one of my colleagues once said he never really ascribed to the idea of like a Mary Poppins Scrum Master. They come in, they fix everything, and then they magically disappear. But you know, the reality is that what you're dealing with a lot is human behavior, you know, and there's a reason why you don't get a physical trainer for you and work with them for a week, and then you just don't magically have a six-pack. You have to work with a PT for years if you want to craft the body that you want. That's a high performant body, and it's the same thing in a team. I've very rarely seen any teams I've ever worked with just magically you set all the Jira boards up, run a couple of sessions, teach them how to do it, and then they just have it down packed forever. It's a years-long process in many cases.
I mean, that a high-performing body, that's an analogy that I think I personify well.
I was going to mention the air fryer here.
So, are they needed all the time? And so, there's a couple of things maybe to unpick there. Are they maybe just needed to help the right behaviors? Maybe could you rotate one of the team members to be the Scrum Master after a period of time? Does it also matter on the size of the team, the size of the program, or the number of teams engaging with each other? So I think like Scrum at scale, where you've got the different ceremonies or safe or something bespoke, when actually interaction between the teams is an overhead that actually the Scrum Masters are perfectly, I guess, driven for. So I guess there was a couple of things there. Can you rotate the Scrum Master? That's lucky.
But I mean, rotating the Scrum Masters, you still have that problem that I mentioned, right? You don't have that outside observation because you're still going to be one of the people doing the work, right? So it becomes quite difficult to take yourself away from it and seeing what are the things we need to improve as a team.
I think about team stability, right? Whenever you rotate, you're removing not all of it, but some of your history in terms of predictability. You got that J curve of change we're going to have to start getting used to. So let's say our team, right? And maybe you, Simon, are the Scrum Master for a few weeks, and then you switch it and Darren becomes a Scrum Master. I'm going to have to change the way I interact with the Scrum Master. We're going to change the way that the ceremonies are run, and we're going to have a drop in productivity. It's not impossible, but it's far from ideal, isn't it?
And you also have to rebuild a lot of the trust, you know. I mean, an important currency of a Scrum Master is their influence, you know, where the team's manager can just tell them what to do, and where the product manager can just tell them what to build. You know, the Scrum Master leads through influence, and influence always lasts much longer and is much more enduring and much more powerful than that. If you're switching the Scrum Master out every couple of weeks or months, then you have to rebuild that trust and influence over and over, which, like you said, you lose a lot of time that way and productivity.
How about then so one of our customers, I remember, they parachuted in this guy, sort of, you know, he was a Mary Poppins, but he wasn't going to magically go away. He was a Mary Poppins that decided to settle down. So that sort of, but moved across a number of teams. So never really went away, but once one team were mature, and it took probably 6 months. Once one team were relatively mature, they jumped to another team, but they were still available for the first team. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with certain cases where, and we've done that, you know, at the Zone, where certain cases where a team doesn't have a Scrum Master and they need someone to just kind of help give them a bit of a boost. And in many cases, if a team is pretty mature, you might not need the Scrum Master there all day, every day, like you said. Sometimes it's just being available to support them is just what's needed. I mean, typically we don't put Scrum Masters across more than 2 teams. We sometimes do 3, but definitely no more than 3, because otherwise you just won't know any quality information about that team. But yeah, I mean, you can over time, if the team's pretty mature, then that frees the Scrum Master's time up to go deal with other areas.
That quality information point's an interesting one, because Scrum Masters are often used as a conduit of reporting to management. And actually, that's quite an interesting point, because if you've got someone spread too thinly, how are they going to know what's really going on? And then all of a sudden they become an overhead to the team because they then have to go find out.
Yeah.
And when you said, Lucky, you said like definitely no more than 3 teams, right? And my point is ideal 1 team, definitely no more than 2. But you know, everyone's got their own take on that.
I think that's right.
But the further you go down the road of a Scrum Master can be on more than 1 team, and more than 2 teams, and more than 3 teams, the further you go down the road of them being a valuable member of the team to being a administrator for the team, and they end up just booking sessions and telling people where and when to be, and that's not a Scrum Master. That's an admin role. So you need to make sure that if you are spreading that Scrum Master thinly, that they've got to be very good, because we all know that you can get very bad Scrum Masters. And if we're talking about quality of Scrum Masters, I would say no Scrum Master is probably better than a bad Scrum Master.
I agree.
And, you know, it's very easy to become a Scrum Master these days, right? You pay your $10 and get the certification, right? And then you're a Scrum Master. Those ones, I agree. They're probably detrimental to the team. What we want to do is figure out how to understand if they're a good Scrum Master, and then maybe that should be more.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a good point there. The fact that a lot of the organizations that we go into, they generally have either no Scrum Masters or bad ones. And I think you're right. You need high quality people in these roles, because it is a sophisticated role, right? You need to understand people, you need to understand process, you need to understand the principles behind it. And I think organizations get trapped in thinking they've just got to hire anyone with a badge to get in these roles, and they need to be a bit more diligent and understand how important that role is.
Yeah.
That's true.
Does it matter then the number of Scrum Masters you've got? If we put maturity to one side, just assume that teams are at a good level of maturity in this example, does it matter if you're now operating at scale, that you have lots of teams, or you're using one of the frameworks?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I mean, yeah, I mean, if you need, even if you don't necessarily have a Scrum Master per se, who has a title of Scrum Master, you know, the role still, when you're talking about at scale with lots of teams, needs someone with the skill set to hold those teams together, you know. And a rank and file project manager has a role in that, but it's not the same skill set as a Scrum Master, you know. And also when you're talking about at scale, you know, there's issues, there's challenges, there's problems, and there's a natural inclination to fall away from agility when you're at scale, that a Scrum Master has a very specific job to look at and to try and prevent or fix, you know. And so it even becomes even more important at scale that you have those types of people around, because it's just so easy for an organization to diverge away from it.
Yeah, and I agree, right? And it's neat how you put it, right? So a team doesn't have to have a Scrum Master, but they do have to have someone that does that kind of role. They do have to have someone that removes blockers and etc. You could argue the same thing for product owner in that case, right? A team doesn't have to have a product owner, but they do have to have someone that prioritizes their backlog and signs off on quality. So are we saying that someone on the team can do that? Because we're dumbing down the role of Scrum Master. We could do the same thing for product owner. You don't have to have one of the team members can be the product owner. Simon.
Sorry. That's a question.
Anything to do with admin screens and profiles, Simon's your man.
I suspect that product owners is subtly different, though, isn't it? Because product owners representing the business. They're not driving behaviors or in coaching the team. They're fundamentally representing requirements.
But I could actually,
in organizations that we see that are doing this transition either from waterfall to agile or agile to scaling agile, what we tend to see is, well, we don't need product owners because we've got BAs, they can do that. And then the same way on the other side, oh, we don't need Scrum Masters, we've got project managers, they can do that. And it's just the same role, but with a different title. And they don't do a great job. right? Unless they've gone through that process of understanding that it's not just about putting a process in place. It's about how do we do this together, and how do we become a family style team, and how do we all care about it, and how do we all take responsibility rather than one person taking responsibility. That's the role that a Scrum Master helps with. It's not process. It's, what is it?
It's the whole system of how it all works together, because a lot of times I get the question of, well, why can't the engineering manager just do that? Why can't the product manager just do that? We don't need a Scrum Master. Why can't just project manager do that? And I would argue that each of those roles and the skill sets they possess are focused on something very narrow and specific to just their piece of what makes a great product and a great team, right? Like a product manager is not worried about whether the team operates well. They just want the features that they want delivered, right? A project manager isn't concerned with the efficacy of the product. They just want to get it done by a particular date within a particular budget. The engineering team couldn't give a hoot, about what the business thinks per se. They just want to build, great software. But a Scrum Master thinks about all of those things, or at least good ones do. A Scrum Master is trying to understand how do all of these roles need to work together effectively in order to build a great product. And all of those roles think very narrowly in scope, where a Scrum Master is thinking about that entire system and how it interacts. No one else really has that skill set, in my opinion, anyway.
We were having an interesting chat a couple of months ago with one of our US partners about sort of how some organizations, or at least some teams, had misunderstood the point of a Scrum Master, that it was sort of, it had gone too far. In the old world of waterfall, you had project managers that were hounding the team, and they clearly weren't doing things for the team's benefit. Mm-hmm. And then pendulums kind of swung the other way, where you sometimes have Scrum Masters that are now defending the team, as if like, actually, this is now, we had another customer describe it as glorified coffee brew who don't appear to do anything, and therefore it's gone too far the other way. And a good Scrum Master is capable of, actually, this isn't around defending the team at all costs, because we need to make sure that those people are happily interacting with each other. Actually, how do we make sure that team are interacting in a good way so that they can deliver effectively? That's I guess a subtly different thing that folk have missed. Maybe that's the subject of something else. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I agree, because I mean, for me, I've always seen the team as not just the engineers. The team is the engineers, the product owner, and whoever else is necessary towards delivering a product. These people need to interact every day, and they need to work together every day. They need to struggle together, think together, win together, fail together. And, regardless of who they report to or what the organizational hierarchy looks like, the only thing that should matter to the Scrum Master is that these people work together as a cohesive unit so that they can deliver. Not everybody else thinks like that, like we do. And which is why, spoiler alert, I think they're needed, in my opinion.
So, I mean, I think what we're highlighting there is actually that it needs to be the Scrum Master with the right understanding and knowledge and expertise that's sort of, seen it, done it, not just had a badge and understood the concepts, but understands why they're doing it. Therefore, are we saying that actually you should only have a Scrum Master across the team if they're good? And if they're not, it's arguable that the team should go without.
Yeah, I agree, because I think, and I think you touched on it, Darren, earlier, and that's one of the things I've expressed a bit dismay, and I've interviewed many Scrum Masters for various Scrum Master roles over the years. And one of the things, to y'all point, is that there is such a lack of skill set. Yes, they understand the process or they understand Scrum, but they don't fundamentally understand the underlying philosophy behind it and why these things exist. And also, too, they don't connect things like Scrum, Kanban, XP, and etc. to the technical practices that make Agile work. TDD, BDD, all of those usual things, pairing, mobbing, And they also don't know how to connect that to the product processes that exist. Great MVPs, minimum marketable product, user personas, buyer personas. They kind of just stop at okay, I know how Scrum works, and I'm going to just implement that. They don't understand what are all of these different disciplines and how they tie together to create, agility in both a team and an organization.
It's an interesting one because, I mean, back in the day, clearly I've been around a bit before I get abuse from the others. And bread and butter originally was waterfall and Prince and all those different sort of flavors. And I would say probably 3/4 of the project managers that I came across, my peers, were just not very good. They'd been on a Prince course, understood the bare bones concepts, and then just painting by numbers followed the process without any understanding. And a similar challenge there with Scrum Masters. What we're saying is actually what makes a good Scrum Master is true understanding, an open mind, and paying, I guess, understanding not just here's the theory, it's what's the point of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And the benefit or the marker is what do you do when things go wrong? It's easy to be a Scrum Master when the team's good and mature and they're doing well and things don't go wrong. It's when things go wrong and following the rule book won't help you. What happens when you can't follow the rule book anymore and you've got to follow your own rule book, playbook? So therefore you've got to understand what you said, Lucky. You've got to understand the underlying principles behind why are we doing this. And then you can make a decision and help and support the team. Because if all you do is follow the rules, then you don't need a Scrum Master, because a team can follow the rules on their own.
Yep.
It's what happens when you have to do something and you're not following the standard rules.
How about the next level up, Agile coaches?
Wait, so are we agreeing so far that as soon as Simon gets a six-pack, that we don't need Scrum Masters anymore?
I mean, I've got one already. You just can't.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's hidden.
I think we certainly three of us on this call agree that Scrum Masters are needed, but we've got to make sure we're getting the right ones that have got a systemic view of the problems that they're trying to solve. Well, Simon, do you agree with that?
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I do agree that Scrum Masters are needed. I can see why a Scrum Master would be beneficial in the long term for a team. I wonder if you can then spread as time goes on, and that a couple of things that Abbas and Lucky were saying about sort of making sure sort of wrong behaviors don't creep in, that really resonates. So I mean, and trust, it's a valid point.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect that maybe a model where you can actually get the Scrum Master to back out and be across a couple of teams. So maybe if you had 6 teams, 6 Scrum Masters, 3 of those actually were just interim until you have maturity, maybe a year, and then you just back to 3 Scrum Masters. I can see Abbas wants to fundamentally disagree with me. He's pulled the face, but should we hit Agile coaches?
Let's hit Agile coaches.
Right, so they come in, they help fix stuff, and then they can go.
But I mean, do you need Agile coaches if you've got good Scrum Masters?
Here, I'm with you on that, Darren. If you've got good Scrum Masters that can do all of the things we just said, we won't go over them all again, but they can do all the things that we said that they need to do, then I don't think you need Agile coaches. I think it's a redundant role.
How about? Oh, sorry, Lucky.
I was going to say a question for you guys, because I'm curious what you think. Is a Scrum Master and Agile coach the same thing?
I think a Scrum Master should be an Agile coach, but if you have the role of Agile coach, usually organizations have Agile coaches that are not also Scrum Masters. They just kind of swan about telling people how to do Agile, reading them the Scrum guide. But a good Scrum Master will also be able to coach not just their own team, but coach across the board. Do the right thing for the organization.
Do you see Agile coaches in organizations where Scrum Masters are weaker more, would you say? I guess, like, if you've got good Scrum Masters, you've got the team level stuff covered. But what about, you know, some of the roles outside the team that are supporting the team in their delivery?
It's an anti-patch in that case, because what an organization is saying then is, I can have bad scrum masters because I've got a couple of agile coaches. Therefore, I could have got 10 teams, 2 agile coaches, I can have 10 crappy scrum masters. Whereas if you had 7 good scrum masters, you wouldn't need the agile coaches. And
so you know, I guess, what are we saying then, that actually Scrum Masters, you know, are here to stay, depending on how many you have spread across the team, but they should be viewed as a fixed part of your delivery because of how valuable they are. Agile coaches, if you use them, they should be for a finite period only, just to get your Scrum Masters good enough, but they should never be viewed as a long-term role. Thoughts on that one?
yeah, I agree with that entirely.
Yeah.
It's either a short-term or zero-term role. And I realized that my LinkedIn says agile coach, so I should change it. By the time you're watching this, it won't.
I'm just writing your I'm just writing your sort of, you know, your P45.
You know, it's an interesting thing too, because with on coaching and the role of an agile coach, or even the role of a scrum master, sometimes I hear, oh, we don't need any of that namby-pamby, touchy-feely, coachy stuff. The teams are just there to write code and deliver it. Why do we need all this other BS around it? They should just do the work. It's a waste of time. How does a scrum master create value in that scenario then?
By being a good, solid scrum master that can handle those things. Because why would an agile coach be able to do it when a scrum master couldn't? If the scrum master's got the skills and the tenacity and the teeth to be able to do it, why would you need an agile coach in that role if the scrum masters are strong enough? Get it, if the scrum master's either junior or new to the game, then they might need help and support, but surely there's other scrum masters that can do that. So maybe, yeah, as Simon says, agile coaches in order to bring the scrum masters up to scratch, but no more than that.
Yeah.
And then, therefore, the only time that you have agile coaches for longer periods of time is when you've got tons and tons of teams, and you have some form of transition of large sort of delivery departments.
Would agile coaches find themselves, especially if you have pretty high performance scrum masters, would agile coaches find themselves more useful doing agile coaching at a senior managerial level, C-level, executive level? Is it more useful there? Would they even accept that kind of coaching?
That's nice. That's nice, right? So, sorry, Simon, go for it.
No, I was going to wonder if we needed to define what we meant by agile coach, but we are going to be rapidly running out of time. What we're talking about, so we don't delve into it, is not a delivery manager or an RTE or you know, agile program manager or whatever they're calling. What we're calling is the person that's advising, not in the delivery pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a necessary thing that needs to be done. Like I said, to that system of support around the delivery, right? So you've got, you know, bigger things outside of the team that you need to care about. You know, your compliance stuff, your governance. What about your technology? You know, your leadership team. You know, those kind of things. They need to be on board with, you know, the outlook and the way that we're doing things and how we're operating. So in that case, I can see an argument for an agile coach. Whether they need to be called an agile coach, I don't know. But
yeah, I agree. I think those last 2 points, Lucky and Darren kind of switched it for me. I think you probably need an agile coach, whatever we're calling them, for the people outside of our delivery teams, right? So for leadership, for marketing, whoever it might be, right? If we're doing organizational agility, that's one thing, but for, you know, more traditional kind of organizations that need to understand the agile process, but aren't directly involved with the delivery teams, they probably need an agile coach across all of those to say, how should you act in HR? How should you act as a leadership team? How should you act as, you know, the C-suite? Because we're an agile organization, you probably need agile coaches for that. I agree.
Yeah, I could see that, because very often, you know, there's certain things that exist very far outside of the team that affect the team. and certain processes or behaviors or structures or whatever, those often are not really compatible with Agile. And of course, those people wouldn't know that because they don't have any experts in that. And so you probably do need someone with that expertise at that level or in those areas to look at improving those things or aligning those things with agility. It's almost like your Scrum Masters are optimizing components of the system, and your Agile coaches are optimizing the system itself, so to speak.
Is it then possible that actually, so, we briefly mentioned sort of delivery managers or Agile program managers, if you're running at scale in any form, is it maybe their job ongoing to deal with the Agile behaviors for the leadership? And the only time you would have an Agile coach is to help support that person become good enough to do it. And maybe what we're saying is things like Agile coaches, whether at the team level or management level, are always finite, because they're there to support the people that are going to be operationally continuing to exist, to make sure that they're good enough, and then they go.
Yeah, I could see that. I definitely could see that. They may, who knows how long the Agile coach might need to be there. In my experience at many organizations, the higher you go, the harder it is, because, or what's the old quote, the higher, the fewer. In other words, there's less and less understanding of agility at a grassroots level, so more work is required, and you have to put in more energy and more time to get those people there. And of course, those individuals are significantly more powerful in an organization. So you have to really have a very strong long-term strategy for change in that situation. But how finite it is, I'm not sure. Sometimes it might be a very long process in and of itself, but yeah.
I think you're right. It depends on the scale of the organization, depends on the size of them. And then also you mentioned strategy, and whether the senior people listen to that strategy or not also depends on the trust. And that trust takes a little time to build, because they have to believe, more senior people need to be won over by sort of displayed experience and expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know Erica's going to tell us off if we overrun. So I mean, it sounds like Scrum Masters are absolutely needed ongoing in the teams. Agile coaches is probably more a question of the size and scale of what the organizations and the level of current maturity as to whether they're just a short-term sort of fix or whether they needed slightly more long-term. But
working at a higher level.
Yeah,
exactly.
So Agile coaches can be Mary Poppins, but Scrum Masters have got to be more Ted Lasso.
I like that. I like that analogy. That's a good one.
So I mean, probably one for another time is then Scrum Masters sort of, how do you find the good ones? Because the reality is, if we're saying that there's a large number that aren't, and we're saying that actually having really good ones is the key here, how do you make sure for a lot of organizations trying to maintain, I guess, good networks of existing Scrum Masters is challenging. I mean, we certainly provide them as a service for some of our sort of organizations, customers, but
I like it. I think that's definitely a future kicker about how do you ensure that you don't hire duff Scrum Masters, and why should you?
Yeah, that'd be a good one, because I think often in many interviews that I've done, what we often look for is, all the typical trappings and skills that we look for in a Scrum Master. But what we really care about is, do they have that spark? Do they truly understand the principles, even if they might not know all the terminology, even if they might not know specific types of workshops like story mapping or something like that. But if they have the spark, then they can be taught a lot of the other techniques. If they don't have the spark, I don't think I'm able to define the spark in the time we have left. But And then it's there.
I think it's the same argument for trainers and a few other roles that rely on personality. Sorry, Darren.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that applies to any role that I always hire for attitude first, because you can teach the skills.
Mhm.
Just at a previous client that we had a few years ago, they asked us to interview for Scrum Masters on a permanent capacity for their teams. And I interviewed probably 35, maybe 40 Scrum Masters, and only 3 of those I felt were good enough to even have proper interviews. And then they hired 2 of those. So it is tough, and there's a lot of people who got the certification, but not a lot of people who got the attitude. Yeah, so
I reckon we'll probably have to park that one, because
yeah.
I'm itching to get into it already, and we'll get told off.
Maybe we could set that up next time, Lucky, for you to join us for that discussion then.
Yeah, more than happy to. As my granddaddy used to say, many are called, but few are chosen.
At least we now have a title for this.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Well, cheers all.
It's been a pleasure. Cheers, Lucky. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Hello.
appreciate it.
Lucky.
Thank you.
Cheers.